Welcome back to Weekend Dawn with myself, Liesl Wilson and Jacob Moshoka. We are with you until 9 o'clock here on Newsroom Africa, DSTV channel 405. Now, we've seen allegations of gender-based violence sparked a heated debate on Tuesday after accusations of gender-based violence were leveled against Julius Malema and President Cyril Ramaphosa. Now, what we witnessed was a display of political grandstanding as parliamentarians used the struggle against gender-based violence to score some points. Take a look at this.
Now, my question to Honorable Malema is that gender-based violence is happening at your house. The matter has been dragging for too long. Members of the EFF, instead of them condemning the issue, they decided to crack a joke so that they can deviate the matter on Thursday night. Because they knew about the matter for a very long time. You are abusing your wife. We want you to stand here in front of the nation.
Question must be brave
in front of the nation. And assure us, if the matter is true. If the matter is true, are you going to apologize?
I've never laid a hand on my wife. I asked that question precisely because I got information that the president used to beat his wife, Noma Zizi, the late wife of the president. May her soul rest in peace.
Women in this country suffer from post-traumatic stress and from stress disorders because we are under siege. We are at war with one another. And when this kind of thing is made light of to make political point scoring a big deal in this House, it is appalling. And if anyone in this country thinks that what just happened in this House is acceptable, they certainly need their heads read. And we as Parliament now need to stand together and say enough is enough. This House is an honourable House. The decorum must be restored. And if you cannot behave yourself in an honourable fashion, you do not belong in the servant public Parliament of South Africa.
So the question must be asked, are politicians committed to women's issues? Now, spilling the tea with me is independent human rights activist Yvette Raphael, feminist lawyer and politician Thando Gumede, as well as Fatima Moutlatse, founder and chairperson of Black Women Caucus. Ladies, good morning. Thank you for joining us on the tea. I mean, as we sip on our tea, mine's rather bitter, which probably reflects the state of some of the issues reflected in women to date. I'm looking at the plans the president had outlined, just before SONA, leading into SONA, looking at some of the acts that will be amended, looking at the 1.6 billion that had been allocated. But I think the underlying issue is the narratives, the culture, the traditions that continue to permeate the windmill to date. What are your thoughts on that clip that we just saw about Julius Malema, President Cyril Ramaphosa, Boy Mama Bolo, and just how they use this perhaps as a means to score some political points?
Yes. I think more than anything, it's not political grandstanding, it's weaponizing women. And when I saw that play out, in my mind, it was black women, you are on your own. There is no one currently in Parliament that does really want to champion issues of gender-based violence without using it as a weapon to score some points. I mean, it was totally unnecessary for any of those men to bring up the issues that they brought up. And if you can see how it played out in this country, it was sick, it was saddening to every woman. And I think Natasha Mazzoni is the only one who spoke, although she doesn't speak on behalf of all South African women. That was kind of brave. But how she spoke about it, it's the reality, how that triggered women in households who were watching.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, I think that that political grandstanding, I still do think it's political grandstanding, as well as weaponizing of black women, women's experiences. But this is not new, right? I think we've got a long political history of seeing women being used to fight the battles of men. I mean, we can take it as far back as Kwesi, with the Zuma rape trial, right? We all know that really the back and forth was not necessarily because we cared about the victim. right? But because that was the means of discrediting the president at that particular time. So, I mean, there is a culture within our political organization where men use women, particularly black women, to really discredit each other. And what was quite interesting...
Fatima, I know that your mic is a little bit bad. As we get you a handout mic, okay. Thando, let me bring you in. What do you make of that clip, just before we spill some more tea?
You know, Liesl, I think it's very important, and the ladies next to me, that we start at the beginning. Let's first define what gender-based violence actually is, because the country misunderstands it, and it's very clear with how the politicians engaged in Parliament that they are not clear on what GBV actually is. Gender-based violence is an unfair discrimination against another human being based on the premise of their sex, their sexual orientation, as well as their gender. What that means, and this is very important, is that gender-based violence does not only occur against women and females. It can occur against men and people who are gender non-conforming. Every human being can be subject to gender-based violence. Gender-based violence is one of the manifestations of patriarchy. Patriarchy being a complex intersection of different kinds of unfair discrimination, which include ableism, socio-economic oppressions, XYZ. Now, what is more important to me about what happened at the SONA and the debates is what was not said that shows the blindness of patriarchy in Parliament. Parliament has become a playground for patriarchy to manifest itself. The manner in which the weaponization took place, you had these men that were puffed up with toxic masculinity, fighting and bumping against each other, refusing to back down at one another, or back down from one another. Their point needed to be heard. One person makes an allegation, refuses to apologize. But more than that, what was not said by our president in his response at the end was the incident of Enoch Mbeyanzi, which shows a lack of understanding of what gender-based violence really is. In that incident, we had a boy, or rather an institution, that has a tradition of grooming toxic masculinity. Those boys were forced to jump into rapid rivers so they can prove that they are men. It's called hazing, it's called initiation in South Africa, or ontgroening in Afrikaans as well. And the fact that our president was unable to speak to that, and even in his response spoke about how he's a brother to his sister, how he's got a mother, means that there's a very narrow conception of what gender-based violence actually is.
Fatima, your mic is back on. I mean, you mentioned the president himself. I mean, when him and Julius eventually exchanged apologies, there was no outright denial of the allegations that actually took place. So looking at what happened in Parliament, do you think this is a reflection of some of the apathy we have as a society at large towards sexual violence and gender-based violence?
I mean, I think just before my mic decided to touch me, what was quite interesting throughout this week was that in the same time we've seen this toxic masculinity and really a competition of egos playing out in Parliament, was the same week where a member of the EFF was called out for raping a student from MMU, right? With little response from the EFF, which for me was quite telling to say, hold up. Really, where's the consistency in terms of your understanding and your supposed fights and solidarity on gender-based violence and femicide? And I think it's quite important that we need to be able to hold public figures accountable, because our failure in holding these public figures accountable is the reason why we leave the studio, we go out, we're faced with gender-based violence and femicide, and really nobody can say anything, because I mean, if the president could get away with it, why can't I? If EFF could get away with it, why can't we? And this is really just breeding a very sick and twisted culture of violence in this country, particularly against women. And I do understand, Thando, where you're coming from. I think more often than not, we tend to neglect the boy child, right? We tend to neglect men generally, who themselves, we've seen in the past few weeks, are also victims of gender-based violence. I do think that we need a more robust discussion in terms of how we define it.
Yvette, you look like you have something to say.
I totally understand the issue around neglecting. I don't want to say neglecting boys and men. I mean, they've always had the center stage. They always, get better inclusion and everything. But I want to come back to the point of the president, Julius Malema, and boy. They apologized to who? to each other, to say, sorry, man, I actually offended your ego in a public space. What about the women that were mentioned? What about the South African women who were watching and looking and were triggered at what was said? And I think that is just a show of the boys' club. Why, until we see more women stepping up and speaking out in Parliament, in their political parties, will we see some kind of equity or equality in that Parliament? Because men rev each other up. Say, let's see who's going to say the most around us, and who's going to bring Julius down, who's going to bring Boy down. It was not even worth it, that apology, unless they apologize to the women of this country.
So it seems like the tea has been spilled. We have about a minute left. Each of you, what would your message to parliamentarians be based on that incident that happened this week? Thando, let's start with you.
For me, it's very clear that we don't have a feminist government. We don't have a government that really protects the most vulnerable, being women, youth, people with disabilities, queer people, etc. And it's so disappointing because we have so-called feminists who've joined the ranks in Parliament who have clearly been neutralized and silenced. It is my hope that we will have a consolidated political movement which is led by women with a feminist agenda to change the trajectory of the country.
Yvette?
Basically, when are we going to see men really championing or being behind issues around gender-based violence? The president of this country needs to do much more than just quoting and getting political scoring for actually mentioning gender-based violence. When are we going to see him making real changes? He promised us that Osmatha is going to be released, one of the earliest GBV fighters in this country who's in prison for killing her partner. I think that time is now. He needs to say when is he releasing Martha. We don't want all of this just speaking at certain spaces, but when is he making real actions with regards to gender-based violence?
Fatima, in conclusion.
Listen here, I think we need a consolidated, organized women's political party. I think the time is now. Us relying and depending on men is really not working for us. I mean, we've done so much. I want to look specifically at the past 5 years. We've done so much as a women's movement in this country. However, because we're not consolidated, we allow for our gains to be really used at public platforms like Parliament. I think the time is for us to go back to the drawing board and really figure out how do we really create this feminist government that we need. It's a need right now, and I really call on all organizations that are aligned with a feminist ideology to come together. We need to compete, guys. The next general elections are around the corner.
Well, the conversation has obviously just begun. Let's see how we walk that talk. Ladies, thank you for spilling the tea with us this morning. You'll be back for more, I'm sure. But, of course, just some of the thoughts of independent human rights activist Yvette Raphael, as well as feminist lawyer and politician Thando Gumede, as well as Fatima Moutlatse, founder and chairperson of Black Women Caucus. Again, thank you to them for joining us.